on this edition of Money Life.
Geopolitical risks are so high that even the best of crystal balls, that is, if anybody ever has a crystal balls, can still go wrong. So we are at a point in time, either one, selectivity and the right bets can really pay off. But given that that is a big if, this is really a time where there is a case for diversification because markets have so much fragmentation and things are behaving in such unusual patterns. Diversification is very, very critical in today's market.
That's Indrani Day, head of global investment research at FTSE Russell. And she sees developed markets outside of the US and also China as particularly attractive plays as we move into 2026. She'll explain why in today's big interview. But we start today with Jeffrey Panik, author of Your Future Is Now, Your Blueprint for Solving Your Retirement Puzzle. And then David Blanchett, head of retirement research at Prudential, is here discussing the firm's 2025 Global Retirement Pulse Survey, which looks at mass affluence adults around the world and found that while those wealthy folks feel ready to live out their days in retirement, they haven't necessarily taken steps to make sure they're actually ready. All that, and we'll introduce a contest unlike any contest we've ever done before.
Let's rock this joint!
Oh yeah, when we've been rocking the financial world since 2012, every day the market's open. This is Money Life, and in this case, it's Money Life for December the 2nd. Thank you so much for joining me. We have a great show planned for you today and hopefully executed for you today. We're going to talk about a book that is really kind of in keeping, yesterday's book, which was with Jake Cousineau talking about overcoming financial fear, a good one for people who are looking to get set up into the new year and follow through their resolutions. In fact, my copy, I know who I'm going to be giving my copy of that book to. But then we've got Jeffrey Panik today with his book, Your Future Is Now, and it really talks about doing some blueprinting and planning. It's also a good book for like what lies ahead if you're doing your year-end planning, et cetera. And to that end, both of those books, along with one more, are going to be in a contest that we are doing today. And I will just tell you, it's unlike any contest we've done before because while you don't have to look at the visuals, there will be visuals. Now, you won't see those visuals as you're listening to the show, but they will be on our socials. So we'll explain it all. I can't believe Rob Floyd, our executive producer, has me doing what I'm going to have to do for this one. But yeah. Yeah. And just so that you know, when you hear me at the end of the show, we tape that before we tape this. So sometimes things are a little out of order, like my reaction. But we are looking at really interesting market times right now. It was funny. I was talking to somebody yesterday who said, well, there's all these people who are market contrarians who believe that there's a major stock market top on the horizon. They just don't know when. And I said, that's every market. There's always some contrarian. There's always somebody who is doing something where they say, hey, I don't think we can continue this, et cetera. Remember, as Warren Buffett famously said, the market can remain irrational longer than you can remain solvent. So you're looking for those signs of irrational exuberance. I mean, that's what people are saying when they're saying, oh, I think there's a major top on the horizon, right? And you've heard it here on this show with folks like Zach Johnson from Stack Financial Research. I think there's a major, yes, but even he was saying you don't want to get out until you sort of see the whites of their eyes on this one. There are folks who are saying, hey, in October when the S&P reached 6890, that's its all-time high close, that was the market top, and we're already moving away from that. And there's others who are saying we're going to have one more rally before we get there. You've got Santa Claus and all the seasonal impacts. You could make cases on both directions, but that's what makes the market, right? Disagreement makes a market. We say that all the time. What we hope you will agree with is that we are bringing you great information. We'd love to know who you want to hear on the show. We'd love to be able to make this show better for you. If you've got questions, send them, comments, suggestions, whatever. And hey, wait till the end of the show, enter the contest, and you can send along a question or comment with that stuff too, because that's how you're going to be entering the contest. Is Chuck at moneylifeshow.com, sending me emails with your comments or your contest entries. Right now, however, let's get after it because we've got a great show to get to. Again, Jeff Panik, David Blanchett, Indrani Day. We kick things off with the book interview when we really start talking next.
Everything an advisor needs can be found in one award-winning newsletter. Advisor Perspectives takes the most important financial perspectives and delivers it right to your inbox. Go to advisorperspectives.com and stay informed.
Did you know that there are at least 23 million American adults who can't read a want ad?
It's called reading. Top to bottom, left to right. Group words together as a sentence.
Money Life presents
I'm chatting with my guest, author, lecturer.
You get him to open his mind and his future.
The Book Interview.
Give a kid a book and you'll give a kid a break.
That's gonna be radical, Chuck.
Reading is good. Can we start the story now?
We most assuredly can start the story now. And today, the story is about your future. And we're always looking there. But at this time of year, we are particularly looking at the year ahead. People are looking at making resolutions. We are talking with experts about their outlooks. And we've got a book for you today that if you are considering what you want to do for the new year, or maybe you're trying to help your family figure out what they're going to do. And I've told you, we've got a couple books that we've been doing this with. Well, this is one that can certainly help you because my guest is Jeffrey Panik. Jeff Panik is the author of Your Future is Now, Your Blueprint for Solving Your Retirement Puzzle. He's an advisor at Balance Wealth Partners. You can learn more about him and the book at jeffreypanik.com. Panik, P-A-N-I-K. So jeffreypanik.com. Jeff Panik, welcome to Money Life.
Thanks so much for having me today, Chuck.
Like I said, I love looking at this time of year because I know folks are in that mode of let me look ahead, try to change some of my behaviors and the rest. And your book does kind of lay things out. But let's start with the first thing, which is most people don't have a blueprint. They kind of amass a certain amount of wealth and then they go, what do I do now? And how do we get them to go from that and take that to get to a blueprint without going, okay, I got to blow up everything I did. I got to overpay an advisor to start me over and put me into their products or whatever it might be. How do we get somebody to take what they've got, which was not done with a blueprint necessarily, and say, okay, but you didn't mess it up to where we can't create a blueprint?
No, that's a great question. And I think sometimes it becomes so overwhelming. I compare as you approach retirement, really the years that you've worked, you have accumulated things in some ways like where when you're living in your home, you just gather things and gather things. And one day it's time to move. And it takes a whole lot of time from the time that you decide to move to get everything together. And that's the same way with retirement and planning and organization. And the one thing, like a lot of resolutions that we often see, it's difficult to follow through on them because you just get bogged down, you don't develop a habit. Really, it's a matter of organizing and really putting together an inventory plan, working through in a reasonable amount of time so that you can actually have something that comes out on the other side, really, as opposed to being a puzzle with a bunch of pieces, really a blueprint that can get you to the other side where you actually feel comfortable and you're not even more confused. Because oftentimes, when someone starts organizing, at some point they just throw their hands up in the air because they're either on hold with a financial provider for an hour trying to get a statement or trying to figure out who their beneficiary, who they are, or just getting basic information. And really what you want to do is take your time, spend about 6 to 12 months working through all the different pieces and be organized along with the process.
When it comes to this, how much do people also have to get rid of preconceived notions? Because if you've amassed amount of money, you've done it from whatever you watched your parents do. You did it from whatever you got when you first, started working and somebody told you about a 401k or whatever it might be. And your notions that you bring to it are not necessarily, you might think they're balanced, but they're not truly balanced, et cetera. How much in order to get a blueprint and get solid financial footing do we have to not necessarily completely throw it out, but somehow overcome whatever we've built up as our, this is what we think money's supposed to be kind of ideas?
No, and I think one of the things is really to turn down the noise, whether it's, family, friends, coworkers, they have usually 180-degree different situations than the individual that's looking at planning, as well as just the internet. It's Probably one of the greatest productive pieces of anything that we've ever come across in terms of becoming more productive. It also makes things the worst because everything is generalized. And I think really the important thing is to take everything that you've accumulated and put together a picture that is specific for you and your family and not something that is generic.
One of the other things that happens is that by the time people get to where they're necessarily reading the book, and that's not to say you couldn't give this to somebody who's fresh starting and like just where they're starting their life and use this because they could and it would be great. But as I think about a lot of the people who come to Money Life and they're trying to sort of get things and do better on controlling it, they have pieces everywhere. They think, and in some cases they're right, that it's hard to simplify. You know, I inherited this and I kept it with that brokerage firm. I started a job here and I had a small 401k and then I did whatever. How much of this starts with simplify?
I think that's the as much as technology has allowed us to do that, it's just very difficult as humans to do the actual thing of simplification. It seems like sometimes we make things a lot harder than they have to be. That's in particular with all the financial jargon around retirement planning, it can really have a lot of different pieces. And really, it's very difficult to put all the as we're talking about all the puzzles together. And one of the pieces in the book I have is called the Financial Life Inventory Plan, and really, it's a matter of taking someone, whether they have debt, whether they have retirement accounts, whatever their situation is, and walking them through step by step all the things to think about and look at. Even I use the example of missing money. There's no short, when people move around, a lot of times they leave behind assets. And really, it's a matter of just doing the research and taking the time to make sure you're just not leaving money on the table. And I think if you can do that, it's not meant to be done in a weekend, really a year to 2 years working through to really have a complete picture. And, in most cases, people will use advisors, but like most things, in the end, the onus is on the actual individual and the family members to come up with the solution.
By the way, if you've never checked with your own state to or states you've lived in to see if you're in the missing property in the forgotten accounts kind of file, do it because I'm always stunned. I mean, I was once stunned to find my own name there, and it was about a $40 check. It wasn't about a missing account, but I have found a number of friends over the years just randomly looking up relatives or whatever and going, oh wait, hold it, you've got somebody in here, so you should be checking that. But I also want to point out because you mentioned the financial life inventory. I have positioned this book to some extent for folks who are looking to get things together as if they don't have it together. And that's not entirely a fair judgment of the book from what I've read of it. Because the financial life inventory, that's this time of year, if you're getting ready to do whatever and you're going to make plans for the year ahead, this is how you want to kind of go into it. So explain for folks when you're talking about a financial life inventory, it is not just what's my net worth, like add up everything I own and everything I owe. So I need you to give a little bit more than that because I think that's the key takeaway at this time of year.
No, I mean, and I'll use a couple examples. One would be focus. There's a focus on identity theft. Really, have you frozen your credit? A lot of times that's overlooked. That's a piece that we would look at or part of the financial life inventory plan. The other is, beneficiary management. Have you looked at your beneficiaries? Have you confirmed them? It's a lot of times that gets lost along the way. Look at legacy planning, making sure you have updated documents, making sure that you have the right people as the executor, as the trustee, as the agent. A lot of times, something that's done 10 or 15 years prior, really there becomes a point in time where it needs to be updated. And really, regardless of where you are, and this is kind of the theme of the book, you really want to look at things on an ongoing basis because as time changes, so does life. And so it's really important to stay in front of these things so you get your assets or get whatever you're looking to try to do, whether it's to a charity or a family member, you get those to the people that you want and that you care about.
Yeah. And at this time of year, when people will be setting that stuff, I'm always like, don't forget your insurance coverages, things along those lines. Make
Yes.
sure you understand the policies that are out there, how to keep them in force, all these other sorts of things. Doing all of that is absolutely critical. One of the other things that this talks about is simplifying. Simplifying is an interesting thing, especially for members of the Money Life audience because to some extent, many members of the Money Life audience remind me a bit of my father. My father, who would have turned 101 this week, was ultra conservative in his investments, etc. Invested in what he knew. And then as he got a little bit more money and he got a little bit more experience and he enjoyed investing, he branched out. And then he got to a certain spot in life and he's like, I'm finding this is a lot more to manage. You know, I did all this stuff thinking it was good. And now I'm like, how do I get away from this without killing myself on taxes and becoming simplified? And I can see that in myself. Over the years, I made my stuff a little more complicated. You know, in the next decade or so, I'm going to want to be cutting back on that complication. How much of this is that simple is good at all times, as opposed to simple is good when you need it to be simple?
Well, I think sometimes I'll get around to it really doesn't work. And what I typically, and you could probably acknowledge this as well, there's typically going to be one person in a household, if there's two people, that handles the money. And the biggest concern and risk that I've seen over the years that I've been doing this is the person that handles the money, if something happens to them, what happens to the other person? And I think really part of simplifying is just really having a plan in place that the other spouse or individual can understand. So they're just not left with their hands up in the air, really not knowing what to do and really lost. And I think if you can give any gift, it would be the gift of just peace of mind and just giving the other person the ability where they don't have to reinvent the wheel and just have countless sleepless nights trying to figure out where everything is. I would almost say it's almost like a scavenger hunt in what I've seen in the past in certain situations, especially if your situation is very fragmented where you have things here, there, and everywhere.
From the perspective of what folks can and should be doing, there are going to be people out there who go, okay, Chuck, I don't need a blueprint. You know, it's the same kind of, I put off financial planning until I find a need to do it. What are your signs? Hey, if you see this in yourself, either get a plan working with a planner or make a plan, you know, whether it's using the book or whatever. What are the things that you want somebody to say? If you recognize this in yourself and you don't consider yourself to have a pretty comprehensive plan that looks at everything, you need one.
Well, I think one of the things would be, what is the effect on inflation? Looking at just the cost of everything going up, looking at really, we can look at what the average returns have been in the S&P 500 or various indexes, but we get into this one thing that your listeners are probably familiar with, which is sequence of return. What happens if you have a year where you start down 30 or 40%? Can your plan actually, will you get to the other side if that's the case? And really, I think that's the value really of testing. I would call it stress testing and looking, you hope for the best, but hope isn't a plan. Really what I always suggest looking at, well, what is the worst outcome or the worst case, and then working back from there. And I think if you can do that, no matter what happens with all the noise and all the news, you can get through it without having a bunch of sleepless nights worried if you're going to be able to, 5 years from now, be able to pay for your care or your groceries.
And I've said many times on this show that sequence of return risk is my biggest bugaboo, because certainly at this time of life, and I believe for most people, it's going to be sequence of return and longevity risk. It's going to become the things that you fear. If you don't want to fear them, and I've explained on my show that you don't want to fear them, you want to address them, well, you might want to check out the book. It's Your Future is Now, Your Blueprint for Solving Your Retirement Puzzle. It is out now. In fact, it was released on Veterans Day. I should point out, Jeffrey Panic is a U.S. Army veteran. Jeffrey, thank you for your service. And he's donating some of the proceeds from the book to Canines for Warriors, which is the largest provider of trained service dogs for veterans. But if you want to learn more about him, his career, the book, etc., Jeffrey Panic, P-A-N-I-K, jeffreypanic.com. And if you want to win a copy of the book, we've got a contest that's debuting today. It'll run all week, so you can maybe win it there. Jeff Panic, thanks so much for joining me on Money Life.
Thanks so much, Chuck. I really appreciate the opportunity.
We are turning the page on the book interview, but we're just getting going on Money Life. Later, I'll be talking with Indrani Day, head of global investment research at FTSE Russell, getting their outlook for the year. But up next, it's David Blanchett from Prudential talking about their latest research into retirement. We'll be talking about that when Money Life returns right after this message.
VettaFi is the partner asset managers rely on across the entire product lifecycle. Learn how you can build and support the product of your dreams at VettaFi.com.
Now Money Life looks at what the survey said. Yes, this is the survey said on Money Life. It's where we dig into surveys, studies, polls, any kind of research or data that's going to help us understand what people are doing for, with, and about their money. And today, we are looking at the 2025 Global Retirement Pulse Survey, recently released by Prudential. We have it all linked up where you find my guest. So David Blanchett is the head of retirement research at Prudential. If you find him where we mentioned him in today's show notes, you will find a direct link that gets you to the 2025 Global Retirement Pulse Survey from Prudential. David Blanchett, great to have you back on Money Life.
Great to be back.
This one is really interesting because, well, I love any retirement survey that shows a little bit of optimism, but there's some stuff here that's like, it's optimism, but it's mixed with like, oh, we don't want to talk about it, to a whole bunch of other stuff. So is the difference that we're seeing in this, we as Americans have come to expect one thing when it comes to retirement, which is everybody's going to complain that they're not well enough positioned, et cetera? Or is it when you look around the world, the rest of the world has a better handle on retirement than we do?
Sure. So, a few things. I think that one important note about our survey is that we surveyed mass affluent households. And so these are households defined as those that have $100,000 or more in investable assets. So it's not necessarily like all Americans. We included people from Brazil, Japan, and Mexico as well. And there was definitely similarities in terms of how these mass affluent investors perceive themselves. But to be honest, there's a bit of a confidence paradox. Collectively, this is a group that is very confident about retirement, but a lot of them, they haven't created a financial plan. They don't have a financial advisor. They're not doing the things that you would expect them to do to really be prepared for retirement. But collectively, I would say it is a very optimistic bunch.
As somebody who was in my early 60s, pre-retirement, married only 2 years at this point, and my audience hears me talk about my wife, Gail, all the time. One of the things that I found most interesting as I dug into this was that you were talking to a lot of couples about how they're planning for retirement. The answer is, even when they're couples, they seem to be planning a little more individually. What's going on here? Why? This makes no sense to me because Gail and I, again, we haven't been together long. We talk about retirement all the time. I cannot imagine that people are getting closer to retirement and not having discussions about how it's going to work. And yet that's clearly what's happening here.
Yeah, I think what happens is a lot of times households, married households, they kind of delegate someone to make most of the financial decisions. It's usually the male in the relationship if it's a male female couple, and then there isn't a lot of necessarily communication between the two about how they're going to accomplish this goal. And to your point, like there's some really important differences, for example, in how men and women perceive retirement readiness, the solutions they want to use, and all these different things. And so I think that the results do make it very clear that when you're thinking about retirement, it needs to be a joint conversation. You shouldn't just delegate that to your spouse. You need to understand how you're going to get there, what solutions you're going to use, because I think there was pretty clear evidence that if a lot of folks knew what their plan entailed, they might not be as comfortable than they think they are.
You've done a lot of different retirement research. When couples are not discussing this stuff about retirement, how do those conflicts wind up playing out? Because in some cases, I think you wind up with people who work longer than they wanted to or longer than they should. There can then be resentment and other things. In the other cases, they're not talking about it and they're winding up not saving enough and doing whatever. Is there any sort of like, because they're not communicating, we can say that this is how they wind up worse off?
Well, I mean, there's just some stark differences in how men and women think about preparing for retirement. So, if you control for things like age and investable assets at every single level in virtually every single country, women feel less prepared than men. And so if you have a woman who is kind of leading that charge, she will likely say that they're not as ready. They need to do more for retirement, right? Women are much more interested in solutions that offer guaranteed lifetime income and downside protection. And so if you've got a male who is kind of being the primary decision maker, you're likely to end up with an asset allocation or a set of solutions that you might not get if you had a very comprehensive conversation. And so I think, to me, like, what this really suggests is we have to involve both spouses, in these discussions about how to get to retirement. Because if you don't, I just think that there are kind of, for better or for worse, so some very clear gender biases and how we view retirement. And those might not be controlled for unless both parties are actively engaged in that conversation.
As you're doing this research, we have great tools to help people who know very little about money get to retirement, and they'll help their money last through retirement. But they don't provide those things you just talked about, how women want them more than men, although I can tell you guaranteed income is pretty appealing to me. But do we need either more or different products or a different view of financial planning that somehow says, it's not just that we need to put you on a default plan for how you save and how you allocate. We need to come up with a default plan for how you deaccumulate and live off of it at the end of your life.
Sure. So I think that like defaults that exist in 401ks are a really good kind of first approximation to get someone to retirement, right? If you automatically enroll in the plan and you save at the default savings rate and you automatically increase your savings rate up to 10 or 12% and you invest in the target date fund, you're going to get to a pretty good spot, right? Retirement is a lot more complex, though. I think that in retirement, you need a lot of personalization. And then while we are seeing kind of a lot of tools being introduced that people can use, one of the key insights from the surveys is that, older Americans, really in every country, they become increasingly distrustful of technology solutions, especially AI. And so I think that there is this really important role for human advice where people do need a plan and they need someone to give it to them. Now, like, one of the more interesting findings, I spend a lot of time on the data, is that like younger people will like a retirement plan more if you say that it used AI. Older people will like it less. And so like how you communicate like the tools you're using are very important. But I think that, to me, the key is that we need to help people figure out what they want to do based upon their situation. And we need people to relay that, because it's just very clear that, at least, not today, that we have people that are willing to use these online tools to kind of give them a comprehensive recommendation.
But I got to ask you, as a longtime retirement researcher, and this is a little off the survey, but very much on point with that. I mean, how long have we been doing Monte Carlo simulations and things along those lines, right? Which are, no one would look at them and go, that's AI, but that's AI. That is, when they were creating it, I don't know that we knew that artificial intelligence went together as words, let alone as a thing. But it is now something where, a basic, if you're talking at any age, you're talking to an advisor, they're going to say, hey, based on what you've got, let's run every possible simulation and come up with likelihoods. That is an AI function, even if it's not purely AI. How do we get over that hump? Especially because, yes, in the survey, it talks about how people with an advisor do better. People want the advice. But if you want the advice and you're going to an advisor and the advisor's not using AI in some respects, they're not going to be that helpful either, are they?
Right. I mean, like, one really important caveat, like, that really kind of, it peeves me a little bit to some extent, is that people that have advisors have a lot more money, right? So like a lot of surveys talk about like, oh, people that have advisors are like twice as well off as those that don't. Well, yeah, because they're rich. And so like, we've dug a bit deeper and looked at, like, if you control for things like wealth and income, there are important differences in how I think advisors can impact things like financial confidence. But to your point, like people need a plan, right? And we have a lot of sophisticated tools. And what's interesting is, and this is also up to the survey, like looking at other data sets that kind of track the different types of tools people use over time, like whether you use like the internet or advisors, financial planning. I would have expected to have a lot more people today a lot more comfortable utilizing these digital tools for retirement planning because a lot of them grew up with them, right, over the last like 10 or 15 years. But I just think that retirement is such a personal thing that people just really want someone to talk to. And I think that, to your point, a good advisor should be using these tools. I think all advisors at some point will be leveraging different types of AI in the future. But what people want to feel is personal expertise, right? If you're leaning too much into some kind of other tool, it doesn't demonstrate your domain knowledge on retirement. And so that they want someone to give them a plan. I think what's becoming at least clear from this survey is how you say you reach the plan should probably differ based upon whether your client is 35 years old or 80 years old.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You did, and some of the research did talk about it, that again, folks don't just want that plan, but they want to be able to figure out how to have that plan that is not I'm just saving, but about how I'm decumulating assets. What should that plan? What did they want in there? Because, this is where an advisor certainly has things to sell, but nobody wakes up in the morning. You may have gone and surveyed them, but nobody woke up that morning and said, okay, look, I need today, I got to get some eggs and a loaf of bread and an annuity. Like the annuity was not on the shopping list, but they may want it. So what comes if they're telling you they want a decumulation plan? What's in it?
What we've created is a society of ants, right? People that have to be good at saving for 20 or 30 years. You've got to make, smart sacrifices, put money aside and let it grow, right? We learn to spend from our paycheck. Okay, then at retirement, all of a sudden you're supposed to be a grasshopper and spending this money. And I think that, whether it's our survey or others, like what we're seeing domestically, globally, is that people are terrible effectively at decumulating their nest egg. And so I think that we are kind of headed towards questions as a society is, how important is it for us to ensure that Americans that have spent decades saving for retirement are effectively utilizing their savings? And I do think that's where things like lifetime income are very valuable. I think the best place to get that today is delayed claim of Social Security. With that being said, the issues around the trust fund make it difficult. So there's no one answer here, but I do think it does involve lifetime income.
David, really interesting stuff. I've got more questions. I don't have more time, but I know you're going to do more research, so I'm sure we'll be talking with you again down the line. Thanks for taking time out to join me on Money Life.
Sure thing.
That's David Blanchett. He is head of retirement research at Prudential, which is online at prudential.com. And again, there is a direct link to their 2025 Global Retirement Pulse survey, where you find him in our show notes, or if you look him up on the guest page at moneylifeshow.com. Here we are talking about financial planning. One thing you can plan on with 100% certainty. There's more of today's show, and we'll get to it right after this message.
Exchange is more than a finance conference. It's a community. Join us to gain insights and connections that last. Visit exchangeetf.com.
Welcome to the big interview on the December 2nd edition of Money Life. Joining me now, Indrani Day, head of global investment research at FTSE Russell. If you want to learn more, FTSE-Russell.com is where you are going to get more information. Indrani Day, it's great to have you back on Money Life.
As always, good to be here with you, Chuck.
Let's start with where FTSE Russell's research says we are with this market, because we're coming into the end of the year. We've had a year that, well, frankly, a year ago when I was asking people about their outlooks, they were telling us we'd have a year that would be like this if I looked at the market, but they certainly couldn't predict the kind of 12 months we've had in the interim in terms of what things have been going on. So as we set up for the new year, give us the backdrop for what you see right now in terms of market health and where we're at.
Yeah, so 2025 so far, and everything that I say is year to date, 30th November, US dollar return terms using the FTSE Russell indices. It's been a very interesting year. While, the US markets have been strong, they have hit many new highs. But it's important to keep a global perspective, in the sense that if you look at global equities, the clear outperformer has been China, 34%. it has been developed ex United States at 30%. So China and developed ex US outperforming the US by clear margins, that itself shows markets which are very different from what we have seen for a long period between, GFC to post COVID, where United States was by far the clearest outrunner. And this is in spite the AI optimism. So things have kind of changed in the markets. That's one thing that I want to point out. And I do want to point out that a lot of the outperformance by developed ex United States is because of currency moves, dollar weakening. But China's outperformance holds irrespective of currencies, meaning both in local currency and in US dollar terms, they have similar outperformance over the United States. And the third thing that really stuck me is, equity returns are broadly, you can decompose it into earnings growth and valuation changes. Dividend yield is obviously a small part. China's outperformance has also been driven to a very large extent by valuation expansion, which talks about changing sentiments in the global equities. So these are three things that I would like to point out, which have made year to date, November 30th, year to date 2025 so interesting.
Let's dig in on a couple of those things, because one of the key ones there, currency differences. Early this year, we saw international just absolutely flying, but there's a mixed bag on that in terms of what people are saying right now, where some are saying, yeah, now the currencies have evened up. We're not going to see much currency discrepancy, so don't expect international to continue to outperform. Others have said, look at the valuations. It's still the good valuations or better valuations there, so they do expect it. Where are you there? Is international going to keep rolling, but transition from currency-driven returns to valuation-driven returns? Or is international going to slow down because you no longer have the currency push?
So I'm a very data driven person. So keeping my opinion aside, I'm going to point out a couple of data points. One is when you talk about the currency impact on this total returns, for developed ex United States outperforming the US, a large part, I think it's give or take about 60% comes from currency moves. For China, it is not currency moves. So I would like to point out that these trends are kind of irrespective of currency moves. Secondly, when it comes to the dollar, where could dollar go from here? There are two things. If you look at it structurally, there is certain amount of de-dollarization. And now with the Fed on a rate cutting cycle, the rate differentials also point to, potentially dollar weakening more. So does the dollar weakening story have more to go in a long-term basis? Probably. And if you look at the two other main indicators of, where equities could go from here, I look at the 2-year earnings growth because it kind of takes away the short-term noise, and I look at valuations. If you look at 2-year earnings growth, right now, developed ex US earnings growth is roughly 2x that of the US. China is roughly 3x that of the US. So even in earnings growth, China and developed ex US are better positioned. If you come to valuations, US still remains very expensive, both in its absolute forward Ps and where it stands in terms of percentiles of its own history. US is much more expensive than developed ex-US, than China. So both on the metrics of forward earnings growth and valuations, I would say that the tailwinds that we have seen, the tailwinds for developed ex-US and China this year potentially have more room to continue. And we should also touch upon the fact, what are the drivers of the return in terms of the breadth and the industry composition and structural policy trends? That would be, I think that's another important driver going forward.
It's very interesting to me because this year, entering 2025, what the experts were telling me was, yeah, you can't expect valuation expansion here. So it's going to all be on earnings growth. And we've had the earnings growth. But again, what you're pointing out is, well, okay, we've had the earnings growth, but others have had better earnings growth. And if they can't have their valuations continue to expand, they're still going to be better off with the earnings growth they're seeing there than we're seeing here, correct? That's how I should interpret what you just told me about the statistics?
I think going forward, earnings growth, yes, other major markets have it higher than the United States. And valuation expansion, given how rich US valuations are, US probably has less potential for further valuation expansion, whereas other markets, given their reasonable valuations, could potentially have more expansion. So, yes.
Since we're looking at all of this and we're talking about these numbers, we're talking about them absent any impact that's been noticeable from tariffs. Is that because the impact hasn't been noticeable yet? Or is that because the impact's not going to be noticeable? As you're looking out, when or if do we feel the tariffs?
That's a very good question. So, as I look at all the data flowing through, I think the strength in the US equities, by the way, I should point out the strength in US GDP growth, the real underlying macro growth, and the equity markets have been to a very large extent because of AI investments. I think the headline numbers are something like this, that the first half of 2025, half or little more of the GDP growth in the United States came from AI investments. And similarly, the US equities have been driven to a very large extent by AI. So, AI spending, and again, I must point out this is spending on AI, not the payoffs from spending on AI. So, AI spending is really driving the US economy and the US equity market. And so far, that has kind of modulated the impacts of the headwinds from the tariffs. To a lot of extent, it was also because people had done so much front running on the trades because of the tariffs that so far the impact haven't showed up. And AI has given so much momentum that we think, all right, tariffs have not yet potentially have much of an impact. But I would argue that we should wait to see the first half of 2026 to take a call on whether tariffs have really had an impact or not. We could potentially be seeing those impacts in 2026 early part.
Let's go a little further into your outlook for 2026 because you've talked about where you think some of the potential is for growth. How much are we looking potentially at domestic markets slowing down further? So we had 3 great years in a row, but obviously this most recent year, the one that we are finishing, a little bit slower than the last 2. Can we keep rolling forward just with even more modest results, or can we be surprised to the upside, or must we go through something ugly?
So I would say we are in a world where structural and policy driven issues are really having an impact on macro and equity markets. So in the US, as we talked about so far, the AI story has hidden whatever potential weakness there can be from tariffs. And you are seeing certain weaknesses, whether it comes to consumer sentiment, where you're seeing the lower end or even the middle end consumer inflation ticking up a little bit, both on the expectation front and the real, actual inflation. So there are weaknesses in the economy, in the US economy, but so far really hidden by the momentum from AI. And I would like to point out that the rest of the world is also having similar structural trends. Like China just recently came out with its 5-year plan, and they are very clear on two things. They want to upskill their technology even further to reduce dependence on international, sources of technology. Secondly, they're really trying to improve the margins and profitability in all their industries like EV, solar, semiconductors. That's almost like the corporate governance reforms that happened in Japan in the last few years and led to Japan's comeback. So I would argue those corporate reforms coming out of China's 5 years plan is something one should keep an eye out on. Similarly, look at some structural developments happening in Europe. The fact that Southern Europe is doing so well, Greece, Spain, Italy, they're really outperforming the Northern European countries. That's something to keep an eye out on. And similarly, in Europe, what is happening in aerospace, alternative energy, industrial materials. Similarly, industries like precious metals and mining's doing so well, meaning there are many other industries that are showing potential, have shown potential in 2025 and could go on further in 2026. And those industries have a much higher weight in, as we spoke about, developed ex United States, and we spoke about China's 5-year plan and its potential impact. My point is, we are at a we should pay very close attention to these policy driven, structural changes driven impact on markets.
Let's talk a little bit about the impact of potential rate cuts on markets. Because if I had actually looked at the story that I was telling earlier about how we went from valuation driven expansion to earnings having to drive the expansion, if you actually went before that, before it was relying mostly on valuations, it was relying mostly on rate cuts. Rate cuts were making things get better. And then we had et cetera. So now we're looking at coming into another rate cut cycle. But it looks like it's going to be a short or maybe a soft or what have you rate cut cycle. What are the impacts of rate cuts going to be? Because I know what people think they're going to be. We also know what we thought tariffs were going to do. That hasn't happened. So why should we expect this rate cut cycle to be like the others?
So I think it's very important to consider the reason for a rate cut. Generally, the Fed has very clear reasons for a rate decision, whether it's a hiking or a cut. The point is generally any decision on the rates front in the United States, typically in the last couple of decades, have happened because the signals from the labor market and the signals from the inflation front have been similar. So it's an easy decision for the Fed. Whereas this time round, the Fed has a harder decision to make. Labor markets are weakening, but inflation is rising, both expectations and actual. So, which becomes a bigger problem for them to, take care of the weakening labor markets and potentially weakening economy, or control the rising inflation? At this point, the trade off seems to be that growth and labor markets need more of their attention and hence probably a rate cutting cycle. But that kind of a rate cutting cycle, when you're balancing two risks, is very different from a rate cut that is very clear signal from both labor and inflation. So, this particular rate cut, I would argue it's more of a risk control and may not have as much of a tailwind as rate cuts normally have for markets.
Do you believe it can work as risk control given the dual mandate? Like, can it function in a way that allows the Fed to live up to the mandates? Or, yeah, this is risk control, but just like we're not going to see the full impact of the rate cuts in terms of what might happen to the market, are we not going to see them having much impact on the economy the way we would hope they would?
So, US equities always operate under the term, as we say, can't fight the Fed. So, to that extent, any signals coming out of the Fed rate cut is a positive for the equity markets. But given that this time, this rate cut could potentially, deteriorate things on the inflation front, given that the Fed has these dual mandates that is contrary at this particular point in time, this rate cut may potentially have less of an impact than rate cuts clearly usually have. And I think that's where the risk control impact of this rate cut is more important potentially.
Let's go back to your outlook for the year ahead. Clearly, you see much more room to run if we're doing international investing as opposed to domestic markets. But we also have global conflicts that haven't, again, shown up necessarily the way we would in the market. But if you look at history, those do eventually show up. So how much geopolitical risk is there? If we're going to be looking into your forecast and your outlook, and we're going to say, China developed ex-US, et cetera, how much geopolitical risk do you worry is in that mix?
So that's a very interesting point because, as you correctly pointed out, geopolitical risks are very high in the market. And that I think is showing up in the fact that correlations between different geographic markets have dropped so dramatically. And I'm saying right since, mid 2024, so the last year and a half or so, the extent of correlations between the United States and developed Europe, it has almost halved from about 80% to 40%. Correlations between US markets and China have dropped to almost zero. Correlations between US and emerging markets broadly have dramatically dropped. My point is this dropping correlation in equities across geographic markets itself points to the fragmentation that has come into the market. And a lot of this fragmentation is from the geopolitical risk. So the point is geopolitical risks are in some sense already priced in the market and could potentially have more impact. But the core cyclical drivers when it comes to earnings growth and valuation, where valuations are in terms of their reasonableness, meanings potential for expansion, those two traditional cyclical tailwinds continue to remain for developed ex-US and China.
Last question. We've now gone through a couple of years where we've gotten to this time of year and everybody's been looking ahead fairly positively, et cetera, and they've been pretty happy. If you take someone who does not overhaul their diversification this year and dramatically tilt international, and we come back next year, do you think that they will be pretty disappointed in how the year turned out, even if we don't see some massive downturn in the domestic market?
You know that saying in financial markets that diversification is the only free lunch? And I think today it's at a point where that line rings so true, because whatever the tailwinds may say about earnings growth and valuations, as you rightly said, geopolitical risks are so high that even the best of crystal balls, that is, if anybody ever has a crystal balls, can still go wrong. So we are at a point in time, either one, selectivity and the right bets can really pay off. But given that that is a big if, this is really a time where there is a case for diversification, because markets have so much fragmentation and things are behaving in such unusual patterns. Diversification is very, very critical in today's market.
Well, Indrani, I appreciate you taking a look into your crystal ball for us, and I look forward to checking in with you again down the line as we watch how it plays out. Thanks for coming on Money Life.
Thanks, Chuck. No crystal ball here, only data-driven insights. Thank you so much.
Indrani Day, she is head of global investment research at FTSE Russell. And yeah, that does not include any sort of crystal ball. But if you want to look into their data and more, go to FTSERussell.com. It's FTSE-Russell.com. We'll come back. We'll put a bow on this show, let you know what's coming tomorrow and more as we cross the finish line right after this message. This is Money Life.
Asset managers, you know how hard it is to stand out in this crowded space. VettaFi is a unique partner that can help you across the entire product lifecycle. With a best-in-class index factory and an award-winning digital marketing team, VettaFi can help you build the products of your dreams, optimize your distribution efforts, and grow your assets under management. Learn more at VettaFi.com.
Welcome back to Money Life. I hope you enjoyed the talk today, but now we have a first in the long history of the show, a contest unlike any we've ever done before. And to bring it to you, well, I need help, which is why I'm joined now by Rob Floyd, Money Life's executive producer and contest master. Hey, Rob.
Hi, Chuck. Yeah, we've got a lot to get through here, but this is going to be a fun one.
Yeah, it is, I think. But first, let me set people up so that they know what we're playing for, because we have 3 books that are up for grabs in this contest. They're the book that we featured on today's show, Your Future is Now, Your Blueprint for Solving Your Retirement Puzzle by Jeffrey Panic. Then there's the book that was featured on yesterday's show, Face Your Financial Fears, The Simple Guide to Fixing Your Relationship with Money. And then The Sustainable Investor from Peter Krull, which we discussed on this show on November 17th.
Our contest this week is based on the end of the minting of the penny and the end of an era in your life.
Uh-oh.
Well, you've said that you have a piggy bank that you use to hold pennies only, and that it is stuffed, and that you said it needs to be counted and emptied.
I have indeed said that.
So apparently you can help put off any shortage in pennies just by breaking the bank.
I am not breaking the ninja pig. And yes, it's stuffed to the gills.
No, but you are going to empty it. And so our contest this week involves audience members guessing how many pennies are in that bank. So we'll post pictures on our Facebook page and in our socials, but you can also send an email if you want to see them if you're not on social media. The pictures will show the piggy bank, and that bank checks in at 21.8 pounds when sitting on a scale. So tell us how many pennies you think Chuck is going to be counting, and you are going to be counting them all, aren't you, Chuck? To be entered to win.
Yeah, I will be counting them all. Gail suggested recently that I take the bank, like to a bank, or that I use a counting machine, and that is just blasphemy to me. I do not know when I will find the time, but I will roll them up this week just for you and everyone else, Rob.
Great. So we'll let people enter until 5 p.m. Eastern time 1 week from today, December 9th. So you have lots of time to count them, Chuck.
Send your name, your address, and your guess for the amount of pennies in my Ninja Pig bank. Pictures available on our social media to Chuck at moneylifeshow.com by 5 p.m. Eastern Time, December 9th, to be entered for a drawing to win. Your future is now. Face your financial fears or the sustainable investor. And tell us the books you want in preference order. The 6 guesses closest to the amount, and it's fine if you go over, will win a book.
And please put contest in the subject line of your entry. Chuck will now get counting, so start your guessing.
Thanks, Rob. I do want to point out that I have to count the pennies either way, but you don't have to wait to find the pictures on social media, on our Facebook page, etc. You can follow me, by the way, on LinkedIn. I'll post them there as well. We did give you a clue that would allow you to make a reasonable guess. There are some variables you will never be able to account for that the picture might help you go, oh, let me try to figure out that variable. But for those of you, and there are a number of you who want to enter the contest and kind of search engine your way to answers, you can make a reasonable guess here. But it is the first time we've ever done anything that would have pictures attached that you might have to look at our socials. Tomorrow on this show, Steve Rick, chief economist at TrueStage. Always great to catch up with him. Love his perspective on the market. It'll be interesting. We're getting, there is a lot of differential in terms of what we're hearing from folks and where they're thinking you should be in the year ahead and what they think is going to do well. It's getting interesting. It's always an interesting market. We always live in interesting times. That's not a curse. That's just the way it is. Meanwhile, if you're looking for something that's interesting to do today, well, today is Giving Tuesday, National Day of Giving. That always occurs on the Tuesday after Thanksgiving. As much as we talk about accumulating money, giving it away is a sign of money maturity. I always tell people that. And yes, it makes you feel good when you can do good and do well with your money. And I wholeheartedly encourage you to find your causes and support them. If your cause happens to be special education, well, today is National Special Education Day. It's also National Mutt Day.
Did that dog just say hi there?
Any mutt might say hi there. It is Play Basketball Day, which is good because it's also World Trick Shot Day. So if you play basketball today, you can work on your trick shots. Like today would be the day to do that, I guess. And then also on the food front, it is National Fritters Day. Doesn't say what kind of fritters. Like I love conch fritters, but I also love apple fritters. They are very different foods, even though they're both fritters. Meanwhile, my guests today were Jeff Panic, advisor at Balance Wealth Partners, author of Your Future Is Now, Your Blueprint for Solving Your Retirement Puzzle. Go to jeffreypanic.com. David Blanchett, head of retirement research at prudential.com, and the direct link to the Global Retirement Pulse survey. And then Indrani Day, head of global investment research at FTSE Russell. By the way, if you go to FTSE-Russell.com, like I said, it will get you to their website, which is technically lseg.com/en/FTSE-Russell. But they wanted you to know the right website. Again, FTSE Russell gets you to the same thing. Thanks to them. Thanks to Rob Floyd, my producer. Thanks to Maho, my dog. But mostly, thanks to you for being here, because you make this special and worthwhile for me each and every day. The Money Life quote of the day comes from Proverbs 16:16. Yeah, an old source. And it goes like this: how much better to get wisdom than gold, to get insight rather than silver. Well, of course, that's what we do here on Money Life. We try to give you wisdom that'll maybe help you get the gold. But while you're pursuing the gold, while you're getting insight rather than silver, keep things in perspective and remember, until we do this again the next time, the best thing you could do for your money is not worry too much about it. Have a great day, everybody. Stay safe and calm. We'll see you here on Money Life again tomorrow.
The people who appear on Money Life are here for your and their own entertainment. Don't take advice from us or any other podcast without doing more research and/or consulting your financial advisor. We believe our guests provide reliable information, but we can't and don't guarantee the accuracy or completeness of their statements. Opinions expressed on Money Life are those of the host and guests only and reflect their personal thinking. They're not representative policy or strategy of any employers or sponsors. This show is produced by Money Life Radio, which retains all rights to the content. If you want to use any part of this show for your own purposes, be they good or evil, you must get our written permission first. And remember, with great financial information comes great responsibility. Please act responsibly.
You stay classy, San Diego.